Welcome to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church.
Hello, my name's Deborah, if you haven't met me before, and I usually hang out at Sunday nights for church. This reading is a critical point in the events leading to the crucifixion of Jesus. Pilate seems to be in a very conflicted state. And it is from John 19, starting at verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realise I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at the place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus.
Thanks, Deborah. Hello, everyone. welcome to the Easter weekend. If you're at home watching this, I'm so thrilled that you can join us for the start of our Easter weekend. I hope you've got lots planned for the time that we have over the next few days. It is a pretty amazing weekend to enjoy. To think just over a year ago, we were all locked down. We weren't allowed to sing, and here we are being able to sing again. Thank you to that music team who's been able to pull all of that together for us. Now, if you have been anywhere near a bus stop or anywhere near a bridge or a billboard, you probably would have seen that Hamilton has arrived. Have you seen that? Have you noticed that? It's just been a couple of places around, but Hamilton is finally here. The musical, the marketing for this event is extraordinary. I don't think I've seen so much of this before. I don't know if you know anything about this, but it is a hip-hop rendition that tells you the story of Alexander Hamilton, who until recently was one of the least known founding fathers of the United States. The musical is based on a book by a guy called Ron Chernow. This book, which I have had the pleasure of reading over the last couple of months, actually. It's a good book. It's a little bit different it's quite a lot different to the musical, actually. I'm trying to read it with a hip-hop voice, and it just doesn't quite work. Anyway, as I read through, I've read the 45 chapters, the 730 pages that detail the life and achievements of this 49-year-old Alexander Hamilton. And then in one chapter, at the very end, it details his final days. I quite like reading biographies. I don't know if you're a biography reader. Most biographies, like this one, spend very little time detailing how the person that the biography is about died. And then it's all over. Work finished. Well, added to the numerous historical works from the first century, we have 4 biographies about the life and achievements of Jesus Christ. They are the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Of their combined 89 chapters, 30 of those chapters focus on his final days. That is a little more than a third of the total record. Why spend so much time focusing on the last moments, the last words of Jesus? Well, churches across the globe use Easter to focus on those final days. And from time to time, Jesus is referred to as the Saviour of the world that we understand coming out of Easter. We see that Jesus enters into Jerusalem. We see him fully aware of what was laying before him. We see his arrest, his trial, his beating, his mocking, that eventually took him to an awful and bloody crucifixion before an extraordinary resurrection. Why spend so much time focusing on those last moments? Because Jesus changed the world. Not just politically like Hamilton did, not just spiritually like the religious leaders in his age had hoped for. He changed the world personally for every man, woman, and child then and since, who could see why Jesus died and more. And if that was not enough, he also changed our eternity by showing us life after death. For whatever you make of Jesus, he is powerful. Well, today is Easter Thursday. So tonight, given it's the beginning of the Easter weekend, I thought it might be helpful to try and walk in the footsteps, to follow in the footsteps of Jesus across what would have been his final days, to delve into some of those accounts, those many chapters that talk about those final days. And as we walk in his shoes, may I ask you to think about a question? think about this question as we do that. Who is in control? Who has the power and authority? Let's see where we go. If it's helpful, there are Bibles at the back, and it'd be helpful to look at, I'll make reference to it, but I'm going to be pretty much sticking to the Gospel of John unless I tell you otherwise. Day number 1, Palm Sunday. For us, we celebrated that last Sunday, Palm Sunday. Because of that day, it's called that because Jesus rode on into Jerusalem on a donkey to be received by the cheering crowds waving palm leaves, proclaiming him to be King of Israel. Now, if you think that sounds impressive, then just think about what that scene would have looked like. Imagine yourself being one of the Roman centurions who would have watched this procession because there was some type of disturbance that had happened in the city. And what they saw was no chariots, no stallions, no imperial flags, no trumpets, just a borrowed donkey and hastily arranged palm branches. No military procession with officers marching in perfect formation, just a mob of Jews, lame, blind, children, peasants, and Jesus. 500 years before, Israel's prophet Zechariah had said that they would eventually have a righteous king who would come riding on a donkey and he would save his people. It took 500 years for this man to turn up, and what a pitiful scene. Now, given that the plot to remove and kill Jesus was now fully developed, it was also known to Jesus, it's remarkable that he rides so openly into that very city that will claim his life. I know that if it was me, I'd probably be on the first donkey going the other direction. But he was heading straight on in. Day 1. Day 2, Monday. Jesus heads into the temple and finds it consumed with trade and business. He overthrows the temples and drives out the money changers so that they can't do the business that they were doing in the temple courts. The Jews question him. What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all of this? They say. And Jesus answers, destroy this temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days. If the temple was the place where people met with God, then destroying the temple only to then raise it again 3 days later should point the reader to what is about to happen. Jesus will be destroyed. 3 days later, he will rise again, making him the place where people will be able to meet with God. That is something you would only be able to recognize once he had raised back 3 days later. They wanted a sign of his authority. They would only have to wait a few more days and they would get one of the most amazing signs of that authority. Day 1, day 2, now day 3, Tuesday. Jesus gathers his disciples and he tells them that a time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Now, what do you think of when you talk about someone being glorified? When you think of somebody today who is glorified, would you think of somebody that walks down a red carpet? Would you think of someone that holds very, very big trophies for whatever it is that they'd won? Or maybe somebody who monuments are made of so that you'll be able to remember their glory for years to come. Those things tell you something about how special the person might be. Yet Jesus says that his glory will come through a death. So in John chapter 12, he paints a picture for us. He describes how that glory plays out. Let me read it for you. John chapter 12, verse 24, he says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls on the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it will produce many, many seeds. It's a picture, but it's a picture that talks about how for something to be glorified, it must first be sacrificed or must first die. They didn't know it at the time, But what he was doing was giving them a picture of what would happen to him in the next couple of days. Now, interestingly, while he's teaching them that, Judas Iscariot is running off to meet with the Sanhedrin to arrange a betrayal for 30 pieces of silver. Day 1, 2, 3. Now day 4, it's Wednesday. We have no record of what happened on that Wednesday. Perhaps Jesus put up his feet, thought, I just need a bit of a break, have a Sabbath perhaps, have a bit of a break because what's coming is going to be a little bit taxing. But we have no record, except that we knew that Jesus sent off his disciples to prepare a Passover meal that they'd be able to share the following day. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, Thursday. Maundy, Thursday. This is a somber day. Jesus joins his disciples for the Passover meal as already arranged. The meal is laden with symbolism. Jesus uses the meal to remind his disciples of a day that God saved his people using the blood of a sacrificed lamb spread across the door frames. Those who had that blood protected them, they were saved. Jesus then washes the feet of the disciples to remind them that this is the way that you love. You put yourself out. You put yourself before others. You put others before yourself. What a strange way for the guest of honour, for someone who has just been called a king, to act towards his guests, to wash their feet. And the washing shows you what it means to be clean, both internally and externally. For Jesus cleans the disciples. He cleans their feet from whatever the dusty road was with the sandals that they wear. He would clean them so that they would externally, be as pure as they could be, as comfortable as they could be. But he declares that not all are clean internally. John chapter 13 verse 10 captures this. He answered to those, he said as he cleaned them, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you now are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him. And that's why he said not everyone was clean. There is Judas Iscariot. Jesus breaks the bread. He takes the cup and he dips the bread into the cup and then he hands it to Judas. And he tells him to do what he had already been secretly arranging. It may be possible to be clean on the outside and still filthy on the inside. Jesus came to clean both. And so Jesus leaves to betray. He won't be the only one. Jesus will tell Peter that he will disown Jesus 3 times. So they finish the meal. They head out to the garden. Jesus goes a few paces beyond and prays, praying that famous prayer to God. If you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but your will be done. Now, I don't think it's even possible to imagine if God had decided to answer that prayer. Or if Jesus, with all of the power that he had put on display in the days that we have seen leading up to this, if Jesus decided not to abide by his Father's will, he certainly had the power to do that. He returns to his disciples and he finds them sleeping. These last days were becoming increasingly lonely yet Jesus persists. At this point, Judas arrives, and he appears with a detachment of Roman soldiers and a whole bunch of religious officials. Now, the fact that Judas knows where to find them tells you that this is a place that Jesus had gone to often. And he has made absolutely no attempt to hide it. So, despite the fact that Jesus had taught and healed and lived in the most public of places during the light of day, he was getting arrested here in the darkness of night. The disciples scatter, all except Peter, who follows at a distance. Off they go to the high priest. Jesus is questioned. Now, this, you could say, is his religious trial. Their concern was that he blasphemed, that he claimed that he was God. The penalty for blasphemy was usually carried out by an angry mob who were asked to throw stones at the person. Last time that they had tried, Jesus had slipped away. Hard for a claim like that to stick when you are acting and doing what only God could do. It was just the previous week where Jesus had raised his friend Lazarus from the dead. The high priest doesn't like what Jesus says, and so he slaps him in the face. And while this is happening, Peter, the disciple Peter, is in the courtyard. 3 times he's asked if he knows Jesus. 3 times, just as Jesus said. He denies, and the rooster crows. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Before we get to Friday, may I pause and ask how you're going? As this story unfolds, there is trauma everywhere. You don't need to embellish it much. There's enough of it here to write a Hollywood script if you wanted to make it really gory. And we haven't even got to the hardest bits yet. If you were one of the disciples, it would appear as if the wheels were completely falling off this wonderful wagon that they'd been riding for the last little while. Yet, I don't know about you, it feels to me that at each point, it is Jesus who appears to be calling the shots. He's telling them what will happen, who will do what. He is leading them to the place where they need to be at each part of the story for it to then progress. Not because of the advantages that's going to bring him, but because it appears to be achieving his purposes. Day 6. Friday, Good Friday. Whatever is good about Good Friday. Very early in the morning, Jesus is brought before the Roman governor, Pilate. This time it will be for his political trial. The charge of blasphemy holds little relevance to a secular Roman authority, and so the religious leaders try to make out that Jesus is guilty of an insurrection. To call yourself a king goes against Caesar as king. Yet you should note that there is no charge that is laid here, just the request that he be executed. There are no witnesses that are called forward. Each time Jesus is questioned, he doesn't try and defend himself. They flog him. They mock him. They force a crown of thorns onto his head. They dress him in a purple robe and laugh at him. They call for his crucifixion. 3 times in this account, Jesus declares that he finds no basis for a charge against. He stands before the Jews. I find no basis for a charge against him. He walks back to the Jews after looking at Jesus again. I find no basis for a charge against him. He goes back and checks it out further and then walks back out to the Jews and says, I find no basis for a charge against him. And throughout this trial, we find that of everything that's being said about Jesus by these opponents, that he is labelled repeatedly a king and the Son of God. And it is those who are opposing him who are giving him the labels. So friends, let me take you back to our question. Who is in control? Who has the power and authority? Now, if I might, it is quite easy to get this wrong. We do it every time we put ourselves at the centre of a story. And we're conditioned to do that. It is very human to think that we live in a world that revolves around us. We love to have the power, to have the authority to call the shots, to determine what is right for all. Why is it that we get so upset when a parent lays down a rule, no matter what age the child happens to be? Or a government issues restrictions? Or the police enforce a law? Or the church says something is wrong or right? Or when someone rebukes us? Why is it we get so upset when somebody stands before us and indicates that we're not right? Well, because we put ourselves at the centre of the story. This last week of Jesus' life shows a raft of people putting themselves at the centre of the story. The crowds thinking that they will get from him what was long promised. So proclaim him the king, particularly if that means that I can have some type of association with him. Or the disciples wanting Jesus to do for them what they want him to. Or the Jewish leaders rejecting what Jesus claimed because it was just taking something away from the position or authority that they had. Or Pilate questioning Jesus for his own political peace of mind. Each to some degree assume that they have the power. They have the authority over Jesus. Pilate actually says as much. And this I will put up on the screen for you. John chapter 19. And Pilate hears what the Jewish leaders are calling Jesus, the Son of God. He goes back into Jesus and he says, "Where do you come from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. There is no defense. And so Pilate quite arrogantly says, "Well, do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize that I have power either to free you or crucify you? I have your life in my hands. I'm the one that's standing in authority." It's the last question that we hear Pilate ask of Jesus. Humanly speaking, Pilate's right. He could set him free, and given that he's already declared Jesus innocent 3 times, it would seem like that's the obvious or right thing to do. But to do that would mean that you have to stand perhaps losing face before the mob outside, or maybe even worse, before Caesar himself. So Jesus gives him the answer that only God's King, only God's Son could answer. And he says, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." We don't hear what Pilate has to say there. All we know is that he sends Jesus to the cross. Now, given we have the ability to now look back on this account, knowing what happens on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, let me ask you, who do you think's in control? Who has the power and authority in this story? What is Easter to you? Well, can I suggest that this weekend is a weekend that gives you an opportunity to step out of your shoes and into the shoes of Jesus, and see that at every point Jesus had the power and the authority to change the outcome. But instead, he stepped into your shoes so that you could live under his power and authority. And perhaps by Easter Sunday you might see anew just how powerful and wonderful it is to know the King and Son of God. Why do the Gospels spend so much time looking at the last or the final days of Jesus? Because when they're over, his work is not finished. Happy Easter.
You have been listening to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church. If you'd like to know more about Jesus, get further information, or download other resources, please visit our website at lmap.org.au.